Hello supply chain friends, in this video I will share with you the top 5 books that every supply chain manager must read. And don't worry if you don't have these books, because I'm going to put an Amazon link for each of these books in both my YouTube video description and also on my LinkedIn post so that you can go and purchase them. My name is Jamil Hai and I've been working in supply chain management positions across South Asia, Middle East and North America for the last 2 decades. And my mission is to help supply chain professionals like you build real life skills for your job and career that they don't teach you in college. And if you are preparing for a supply chain job interview anytime soon, you should definitely book a session with me, because I'm going to take your resume, the job description you're applying for, and based on a combination of those two and my 2 decades of experience, will give you some laser guided tips and tricks which will maximize your chances of success. So go ahead now and book your session. So the first book that every supply chain manager should read, especially when they are new in their roles, is called The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. I've talked about this book in a lot of my previous videos as well. And I'm a big fan of this video because each time in my career, whenever I've started a new job or a new role, I always go back to this book and refresh my thinking, because this book talks about some very useful concepts that you can apply to accelerate your learning on your new job, and also share some very useful stories from very senior leaders in the past who have not done the tricks used in this book and they have actually failed in their new jobs. And one of the very interesting concepts this book talks about is the concept of break-even point, which is in the first 90 days, typically you are consuming value from the organization because you don't know your new job, you are still trying to learn, you are trying to talk to as many people as possible, you're trying to understand what are the challenges. So you are actually drawing value from the organization rather than giving value back to the organization. And typically after those first 90 days, you have collected enough information, you have done enough onboarding so that you can start returning value to the organization, or you can start adding value to the organization. And this book talks about the tricks you can use on how to accelerate that breaking point. The second book I recommend every supply chain manager should read is this one, which is called Well Done by Ken Blanchard. Ken Blanchard is a very famous author. I'm pretty sure that you might have heard of his very famous book called The 1 Minute Manager. He's one of the most brilliant writers when it comes to management related books. He has also developed this concept called situational leadership, which I'm a big fan of. And what I really like about this book called Well Done is that it uses the example of whale trainers. How do they energize and accentuate the positive amongst those whales, and they perform their best. And one of the very interesting concepts he's talked about in this book is called the ABCs of performance. So A stands for activator, what gets performance going. Of course, in this case, he has used the analogy of whales, but it almost equally applies to human beings as well. Then B is the behavior, so the performance that occurs as a result of that activator. And then C is the consequence. What is your response to that performance? How do you further accentuate the positive, and how do you really reinforce that positivity in your team in order to get the best performance out of your people? So this is a great book for new managers and even for experienced managers as a refresher. And I was very lucky that I got a hold of this book very earlier on in my career and really helped me become a more effective manager than I was before reading this book. The third book every supply chain manager should read is called Story Worthy by Matthew Dix. And this is a very useful book because storytelling is such an important and pivotal skill in supply chain. In supply chain, guys, it's all about storytelling, because unfortunately in supply chain, you are not the bearer of good news all the time. A lot of times you have to give bad news, and it all depends on how you're framing that story up. And this is one skill which is so hard to master. You know, when you read it in a book, it looks very obvious, but to practice this and to master it, it takes years and years and years. I mean, I've been working in supply chain for 20 years, guys, but I would be very honest that I still struggle with this area, and I continue to read books such as this one to hone my storytelling skills, whether it's written storytelling in an email or whether it's verbal storytelling in a meeting or in a board review and things like that. And storytelling is almost an art which can make or break your career, especially at very high levels, because if you are unable to tell a compelling story to your vice president or to presidents of your company, and you are unable to translate what's going on in supply chain, which is a lot of times very technical stuff, and you have to communicate and get the support of a lot of non-technical people, you can really struggle in your career. And that's why storytelling is so important, and that's why this book is on my top 5 list. The next book I recommend every supply chain manager should read is called The Resilient Enterprise by Yossi Sheffi. Yossi Sheffi is no stranger to those who have been in supply chain for a long time. He is the head of the MIT Department for Supply Chain, and he has written books like this, and he has done a lot of research in this space. And although the examples that really underpin the importance of resilience in supply chain, he's mentioned in this book, are for companies which probably don't even exist now because this book is pretty old. But the lessons are still very much applicable. For example, he talks about a fire incident in a Philips plant, which probably resulted in a $50 million loss to the Philips company, who made chips for cell phone manufacturers like Nokia and Ericsson. But that one incident, which only cost like $50 million approximately to Philips, it resulted almost in a $500 million loss. It almost became the reason why Ericsson was forced to merge with Sony. Some of you might remember the company Sony Ericsson. I know a lot of these companies no longer exist, or they are very small now because the whole cell phone world has changed. But the story and the gist of it is still very, very important. Another reason why this book is so important is that this whole concept of resiliency in supply chain is becoming more and more important again, because we have enjoyed about 3 decades or 4 decades of open trade, free trade in the post-USSR era, where US and a lot of Western economies opened to this concept of free trade around the world, which really helped countries like China to massively boost their GDP per capita and so on. But now we are apparently going back to the thinking of protection economies, right? We are talking about tariffs. We are talking about making things more onshore than offshore. So once again, this whole concept of resilience in supply chain comes back. And some of these stories, although they might be from companies who are probably no longer existent, but those lessons are still very relevant. And that is why I strongly believe that if you are a supply chain manager, you should definitely read this book. And the final book I recommend for supply chain managers is the book called Culture Map. Why is this book important? Because as a supply chain manager, you will be most likely working with people from different countries. I was once in a global role where I was working at the same time with a person from Australia, from Russia, from India, from China, from the United States, and one person from Poland. And you can imagine the cultural differences when those people come together. But this book really helped me in shaping my thinking on how we can collectively work together to deliver our objectives as a team and as a company, although we are from diverse backgrounds. But this book really helps you understand, sometimes in some cultures, people are very blunt. And in some other cultures, people like to say things between the lines. So sometimes what they are saying doesn't really mean what they mean. So this book really helps you understand, because it kind of explains those different cultural aspects and different dimensions for different countries. So it really helps you contextualize on how you can work with people from different cultures. And therefore, as a supply chain manager, this is an extremely important book for you to read. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I've also made videos on topics like how to transfer your supply chain skills from India to the US, or how to find supply chain jobs in Saudi Arabia, which you can watch by clicking over here. Keep watching.